Welcome, Rachel. Nice to see you. The session is now starting to record. Good morning, Ms. Miller. Nice to see you. Oh, that's awesome. Everybody grab your coffee. I know we all did right before we sat back down.
Good morning, Ms. Chattel.
Hey, Ms. Chattel. Oh, Ms. Cavazos, nice to see you.
So can you see am I sharing, what do you call it, screen sharing?
We're sharing ours, and then I'll give you the ability to share yours, okay?
Okay, and I forget where I see that.
If you go, I'll give you permission to present, and then you'll have an ability to share your screen, which is like a box icon.
That's going to pop up in this column here?
Yeah, it will.
All right. Okay.
We're very patient because everybody has to deal with this technology in the classroom, and so we all know that hunting for a button can take a minute.
For sure.
A hot minute, in fact. So we're very familiar with.
Well, I'm supposed to be the professional here, so I'm supposed to know what I'm doing.
Oh no. We're all in the same boat together. But yeah, you'll actually hear me articulate what I'm doing for the audience. Like, okay, now I'm going to allow Doug to present now. I'm going to click a couple buttons, and it just lets them know to be patient and as we move forward. So.
Let's see.
Ms. Ileana's here. Very good.
Carrie, I'm going to request keyboard and mouse control. Is that okay? So that I can click through my slide?
That's if it doesn't work, I'll just do it for you. Just tell me to advance the slide.
Okay. I'm going to request. Let's see what happens. Cool.
What everybody's watching as everybody's onboarding this morning. Hi, Isaac. Is something that Ms. Minna put together for our River Camp series that a lot of you are familiar with. And I know it focuses more on bees than anything else, but we thought that you would have a lot of fun checking out some of the great photos that we put together during this little quarantine effort in the spring. So, hello, Ms. Roberts. Nice to see you. All right, guys. Well, we were going to get started, and welcome everybody. Thanks for coming on an early kind of gray day. And I'm going to let Janine kick it off.
Awesome. Good morning, everybody. We're so glad that y'all are here. I'm just going to start with a few group norms. I know that you guys have probably been to about 1 million of these virtual sessions between virtual trainings as well as working with your kiddos virtually. But just to let you know, we are recording this session. Which we can make available to you after the fact. You came in muted with your mic, but there may be an opportunity to unmute later. We will see. If you do have any questions, we will be monitoring the chat. So be sure to put your questions in the chat for us, and we'll kind of pull them to the side for when we have some time to answer questions. We ask that you try to minimize distractions the best that you can, but we totally understand that life happens. So just take care of your needs as they arise. So I'm going to click to the next slide. Okay, so we are using GoTo Training today, which you guys know, and some of y'all might be familiar with this if you attended some of our summer workshops. So you have a control panel that's on the right-hand side of your screen, and I'm going to kind of show you what some of these buttons do. So this first button here lets you expand and collapse the control panel, just in case you don't really want to look at that thing the whole time that we're on the call. This next button here is to mute or unmute. You may or may not have a webcam button, but that's what that is. If you see that on your screen, it's probably grayed out right now. If you want to make this presentation full screen mode, which I highly recommend, that is the button that you can press. It's just kind of like a square within a circle. It just looks a little cleaner, a little bit more organized, and kind of makes everything into one screen. And then if you want to raise your hand, you can click this button right here. But again, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat for us. We also have a materials section here, and you'll see that there are some materials preloaded. So these are materials that you guys can use that kind of go with the information that we're going to be going over today. So you should have 5 documents in that section. And then here is the chat box. You can select to talk to the entire audience, or you can select to talk to the organizers only or to specific people. Definitely be sure to put your questions in the chat as you have them.
Very good.
All right.
And so we have a bit of an agenda today, welcoming our guest and our feature presentation we'll get to in a second. We will have a bit of a break. It might be a little bit after 10:10, but hey, that's okay. And then we're going to break into a frequently asked questions type presentation from our special guest. And final thoughts, of course, as we try to close down shop and get some information from you so you can get your teacher credits. And we'll make sure that we conclude at 11, or as historically 11:01 is how we've been kind of going. As you know, I'm Carrie Merson, and I'm the education specialist here. Ms. Janine?
I am Janine Garcia. I'm the Education and Engagement Coordinator. Just to let you guys know, I will be asking for your exit tickets towards the end of our presentation today so that I can get you your CPE certificates. I'll tell you more about that a little bit later once we start wrapping up, but really excited to be here. Thanks for coming, guys.
And Miss Minna.
Hi guys, I'm Minna. I'm the Education and Volunteer Coordinator with the San Antonio River Authority, and I will talk to you guys about how to be a River Warrior volunteer and how you can support the River Authority and its mission, and I'll do that at the very end, and also ways for you to join us. So look for that.
All right, looking forward to it. Wait. Okay, so I just want to make sure that we are okay. We're ready to go. No last minute questions from the audience.
So far, chat's looking good. Good morning, everybody. Lots of y'all saying good morning in the chat, but no questions so far.
All right, so we're going to take a quick poll. Which of the following best describes you and your relationship to insects? They're amazing, and I like to look at them close up. They're amazing, and I respect them from afar. I know they're important, but I try to.
Miss Carrie, we have a different poll on the screen, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I know. I got to click on it. But we also have not a fan, but I know my students need to know about them. So we're going to try to see where you feel at the moment about those things. I'm going to launch this poll. All right, go ahead, and everybody should see the poll. Oh, super fans. I love it. All right, very good. All right, I'm getting ready to close in 5 seconds. Very good. So this was kind of our spread, and Doug, it looks like you're in very good company.
Yes.
I think that's awesome. And we also have a second poll that we would like to know. Let's see. we'd like to know what kind of garden relationship you have with your gardens, if any, at your school. That kind of helps us gauge that kind of relationships and a better effort to help you. All right, 5 seconds. All right, very interesting. Okay, kind of an almost, I wouldn't say quite an even spread, but that is very interesting all. See that spread there. We're going to keep close. We have tabs on that data now. Thank you so much. Okay, so need to hide that. And so now it is my pleasure and the River Authority, on behalf of the River Authority and the Pollinator Festival, which this is a part of. Doug Tallamy is our special guest, and he's a professor in the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware, where he has authored 103 research publications and has taught, I've done one, has taught insect-related courses for 40 years. My goodness. Chief among his research goals is to better understand the many ways that insects interact with plants and how such interactions determine the diversity of animal communities. His book, Bringing Nature Home, How Native Plants Sustain Wildlife in Our Gardens, was published by Timber Press in 2007 and was awarded the 2008 Silver Medal by the Garden Writers Association. The Living Landscape, co-authored by Rick Dark, was published in 2014. Doug's new book, Nature's Best Hope, great title, released by Timber Press in February 2020, is New York Times bestseller. Among his awards are the Garden Club of America Margaret Douglas Medal for Conservation and the Tom Dodd Jr. Award of Excellence. The 2018 AHS by B.Y. Morrison Communication Award, and the 2019 Cynthia Westcott Scientific Writing Award. So without much further ado, it's our pleasure to welcome Doug to fill us in on all things insects and landscapes.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm going to allow you to present now. Just give me 2 seconds to click a couple of buttons here to get you started. You are now a presenter, so you should be able to share your desktop.
All right, let's see. Has it happened?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, excellent, good. Well, okay, what I want to talk to you about is, yes, insects. I want to talk about the global issue, the growing global issue that we have with declining insect populations, why that's not acceptable, why we all depend on insects. I'm glad that most of you like them. That's a good start. But even if you don't like them, they're not optional. We need to have them everywhere. And since we've lost them in so many places, we have to learn how to actually make them. We've got to put them back. So I'm calling this a guide to restoring the little things that run the world. And that phrase, the little things that run the world, comes from very famous Edward O. Wilson, E.O. Wilson, Harvard emeritus professor at this point. He's 93 now. He still writes a book every year, though. He's been responsible for starting, I don't know, 3 or 4 entire disciplines, all entirely on his own. Very famous man. And involved in lots of things, but one of the things he spent most of his life on is saving biodiversity on planet Earth. He loves the life around us, and he's worked very hard. Wrote a book called The Diversity of Life in 1990, which really kicked off the whole biodiversity movement. Well, in 1987, he wrote this paper called The Little Things That Run the World. And it was in the first issue of Conservation Biology, which tells you something. The entire discipline of conservation biology didn't even start till 1987. So we're got a slow start there. But this was in the first issue, The Little Things That Run the World, and his message was very simple. Life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, so would most of the flowering plants. And if most of the flowering plants disappeared, that would change not just the physical structure of terrestrial Earth, but it would drastically alter energy flow through our ecosystems. And by energy flow, I mean energy is in the form typically of food. So we're talking about the collapse of the food webs that support the animals that we all know and love and need. And that includes the amphibians, the reptiles, the birds, and the mammals. To a lesser extent, freshwater fish. They would all disappear if we lost our flowering plants. The biosphere, the living portion of the Earth, would rot because the insect decomposers would be gone. Right now, they rapidly turn over nutrients, but they would be gone, so we'd only have bacteria and fungi to do that job. And humans would not survive any of those drastic changes. So this was 1987. It was a pretty somber message, but it was largely ignored. In 1987, people just weren't worried about losing insects. As a matter of fact, we spent a lot more time figuring out how to kill them. If we depend on insects, why do we have National Insect Killing Week? Now, this was 1929, but our society really has not changed its view of insects. This was a campaign to boost all sales of all brands of chemicals to rid the community of insects. It doesn't talk about harmful insects. It's just all insects are bad. We got to get rid of them. And pretty much we think the same way today. I always get people knocking on my door, pest control people saying, it's springtime. I think I saw a spider outside. Let me spray and I'll only charge you $500 for it. And that's the attitude. No, can't do that anymore. Well, even if we succeed in killing all the insects in agriculture, and we understand insects are competing for our food in agriculture, and everybody wants to kill them at home for no good reason, but we just don't like them. But we don't worry about losing insects overall because we think they're still very common and happy in our natural areas. There are two reasons why that's no longer true. The first reason is we don't have enough natural areas anymore. And that's because we've turned those natural areas into our cities, and they're of course not designed to support insects. We've turned them into our suburbs. They're not designed to support anything. Even our rural areas, this is considered to be a rural landscape. It's not designed to support insects. Then we have agriculture. We've got 770 million acres of rangeland in the US. That's 4.5 times larger than the state of Texas, dedicated to cattle. And most of the time it is overgrazed, as you see here. So it also is not designed to support insects. As a matter of fact, food production on planet Earth now claims half of the Earth's land surface. And none of that area is designed to support insects. So that's one reason we don't have enough insects anymore. The other one is that the natural areas that we do have are typically overrun with plants from other continents. We call them invasive species. What you're looking at here is a picture of a park near me, White Clay Creek State Park. That it's a typical park, but every bit of green you see here is an invasive plant from Asia. And I know that because plants from Asia leaf out before plants from North America. So I took this picture in March when the Asian plants were out, but the native plants have not leafed out yet. So all the green you see in this natural area is from China. Multiflora rose and Oriental bittersweet and Japanese honeysuckle and bush honeysuckle and Bradford pear and privet and miscanthus and porcelain berry and on and on and on. Where did they come from? They're all escapees from our gardens. We buy these plants in our garden centers, we plant them, and then their seeds move out into the natural areas. So now about 1/3 of the vegetation in all of our natural areas is from other continents. That's not good for insects because those plants are unable to support the insects that run our ecosystems. And we'll talk about why in a few minutes. But that's the important point there. Invasive plants destroy insect populations. And invasive plants are everywhere. We've got more than 3,300 species of introduced plants into North America at this point that have naturalized in North America, and many of those are highly invasive. I don't know how old you folks are, but I'm old. And when I was young, this was a common sight. You drove down the road, your windshield was splattered with insects. If you looked at a night light or a light at night, that's what you saw. You saw insects flying around it like crazy. Neither one of those things happen now. It's anecdotal evidence, but believe me, there's a huge difference in the amount of insects that are out and about because of a number of factors that have reduced their populations. So we're winning our war against insects, even if it's an undeclared war. And that's why we're seeing headlines like this. The insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? This came out November 2018. People in Europe have been gathering data on insect declines longer than we have in North America, but they're pretty good data now for particularly our bees. We've been worried about the decline of the honeybee and also the 4,000 species of native bees that we have for several years now. We now know that 50% of our Midwestern native bee species have disappeared from their historic range within the last century. We have 4 species of bumblebees that had declined 96% in the last 20 years. So you can say, well, that's okay, they're not extinct. Not yet, but they are functionally extinct. When you've lost 96% of your population, you're no longer doing the job that you used to do. There are 3 species of bumblebees that already are extinct, and 25% of our bumblebees are at risk of extinction. In Europe, the orthopterans, the grasshoppers, katydids, and crickets, 30% of them are facing extinction. There's a lot of data from Great Britain in terms of butterfly and moth decline. This particular moth has declined 99% in Great Britain, and they've lost three quarters of their butterflies are in steep decline. A lot of data has come out of Germany. Germany has seen 79% reduction in flying insects since 1989. 46 species of moths and butterflies have actually disappeared from Germany. But this last statistic here, where's my pointer? How come I can't see my pointer? Well, you can't see my pointer. The last one, invertebrate abundance there, has declined 45% globally, worldwide, since 1974. So the little things that keep us alive have declined 45% since 1974. And as insects decline, so do the birds that need them. We've got 432 species of North American birds that the State of the Birds report now considers to be at risk of extinction. And that doesn't mean there's just 5 left of each one of those species. The signal for impending extinction these days is a steeply declining population. Even if you're starting with a lot of birds, if it's in steep decline, somebody's got to slow that decline and actually reverse it, or it will go to extinction. We now have 3 billion fewer breeding birds today in North America than we had just 40 years ago. We actually took a look at the data from that study. It was from Rosenberg et al. To see which birds are actually declining. And it turns out all birds are not declining. The ones that are declining are the ones that depend on insects, the ones that include insects in their diet at some point, typically when they're reproducing. Baby insects can't eat birds, or can't eat seeds or berries, so they eat insects. The birds that depend on insects, this left bar here, is have lost on average about 10 million individuals per species, whereas the birds that do not depend on insects, the finches and the doves and a few others that can actually breed totally on seeds, they've actually gained gained a little bit in population size. So these data are not cause and effect, but they do strongly suggest that there's a very tight relationship between how well insects are doing and how well birds are doing. Then we have this headline from Washington Post. The UN now predicts that we may lose 1 million species to extinction in the next 20 years. And it always amazes me how they report these startling statistics. It's just as if it's just another headline. They might as well have said, we're going to lose oxygen in the next 20 years and then move on to something else, as if it doesn't matter. It matters a whole bunch. Losing 1 million species of anything is not an option. It is simply not an option because it is other species that run the ecosystems that support us. We've got to keep nature happy on this planet. So there you go. Does it matter? Well, the creatures that keep us alive are disappearing. All right, what are we going to do about that? You know, we humans are terrible at reacting to what we consider to be long-term risks. Look at the way we've ignored climate change. We've heard about it for 30 years now, and we still pretend that it's not there. So let's pretend we're not humans anymore. I want you to pretend you are a bird. because we're very good at feeling protective of other animals. So I want you to pretend that you're this bird. You are a magnolia warbler, and you have just finished spending the winter in the Tallamy Mountains of Costa Rica. So you're going to do the most dangerous thing that you will do in your entire life, and that is migrate. You're going to fly north so that you can reproduce. Migration is the most dangerous thing you're ever going to do because while you're flying north, predation risks are very high, but mostly you're using up a whole lot of energy. And depending on your route, you will fly across the Gulf of Mexico, during which in a single flight, you're going to lose 35% of your weight in like a day and a half. Very, very stressful. People have been looking at the stomach contents of tiger sharks in the Gulf during spring migration, and they find they're full of birds. The birds that are migrating but don't make it, they just fall down into the Gulf, and the sharks eat them. So migration is tough. Once they hit the Gulf states, and then they continue their migration north, because most migrants breed pretty far north in the U.S. They continue to lose a lot of body weight. They fly maybe up to 300 miles in a single flight, and then they come down to rest. They would say rest, but what they're really doing is refueling, because during that flight, they have lost 35 to 50% of their body weight. And at each rest stop, they've got to put that body weight back on, and they do that by eating insects. Remember, in the springtime, there aren't any berries out. Plants haven't made berries yet, so they're eating insects. So migration is tough, and you might wonder why it evolved. If it's so hard on birds, why did it evolve? And the answer is it evolved for the same reason that any behavior evolves. The benefits of migrating outweighed the costs. The costs are huge, but the benefits are even greater. So what are the benefits of migrating? Well, think about where they're migrating to. Migrants end up with more food. In the temperate zone, in the springtime, we have this giant flush of leaves. All these new leaves come out, and that is followed by a giant flush of the caterpillars that eat those leaves. And it's those caterpillars that are driving the food webs of these birds during migration and during reproduction. That doesn't happen in the tropics. If the birds stay in the tropics, there is no giant flush of food. There's a ton of competition in the tropics. So it's actually a very tough place to make a living, because there's so many species down there fighting for the few resources that are there. So you've got a lot of resources up in this very rich temperate zone during the springtime. You might as well move north and take advantage of that. So it's the spring bonanza of insects that gave birds the opportunity to reproduce more. If they flew north, they could make 3 to 6 offspring per year. And if they didn't, they could only make 2 to 4 offspring per year. And it doesn't sound like a huge difference, but it is a big enough difference to make up for the costs of migration. So I want to emphasize the fact that bird migration is only adaptive, or it only was adaptive, because there were so many insects that were seasonally available in the temperate zone. It was insect driven. How important are insects to birds? Well, this robin represents it pretty well. A paper came out in 2018 said that birds eat 500 million tons of insects each year. I have no idea how they measured that, but there it is. It was published, so let's say that it's true. But it was offered in the same vein that our society thinks of insects. So they said, well, look how good birds are at pest control, as if all insects are pests. Let's rewrite that and say birds require 500 million tons of insects each year. And if we don't have that many insects, we're going to lose the birds. So when migration evolved, there were plenty of insects in the temperate zone. Is that still true? Are there still enough insects in the temperate zone to justify the costs of migration? And the answer is, every time somebody measures it, no, there's not, which means the birds are suffering the cost of migration without getting the benefits of increased reproduction. Let's focus on the impact of introduced plants on insect declines. There are other causes of insect declines, but let's focus on the way we landscape, how that might be impacting the production of insects and thus the production of the birds that need those insects. There's your favorite crepe myrtle right there. We did a study. We've done lots of studies. Actually, that's the question we've been asking for the last 15 years. We've got a lot of published papers on it. But this was a simple one we did recently with, I did it with an undergrad. We simply went into hedgerows in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. that were invaded by non-native plants. So here's autumn olive and multiflora rose and a bunch of other things. That's a typical hedgerow right there. And we counted caterpillars in a standardized way and compared caterpillar populations in those invaded hedgerows with hedgerows that were not invaded, that were almost totally native plants. And what we found is that there was a 68% reduction in the number of species in those hedgerows, number of caterpillar species, a 91% reduction in the abundance of those caterpillars, and a 96% reduction in the biomass, the weight, total weight of the caterpillars in those hedgerows. So this is the figure. If I said how much bird food is there, that's that figure. There's a 96% reduction in the bird food available in those invaded habitats. This doesn't affect just a few obscure birds that are migrating. It impacts 386 species of neotropical migrants that may no longer have enough insects to justify that migration. I mean, no wonder our birds are declining. And we're talking about the common birds that we all know and love, the swallows and the swifts, our orioles, our hummingbirds, our vireos, our tanagers and buntings and flycatchers, our thrushes, warblers. What do we have, 48 species of warblers or something? A lot of warblers. They're all insectivores. And of course, we have the birds that don't migrate, the resident birds that need a ton of insects in order to reproduce. So I show this figure all the time because it's so amazing. Chickadees, this is what is it? The Carolina chickadee. That's the one that you have. 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to make one clutch of chickadees, and they're only 1/3 of an ounce. And they're typical. They're typical of most of the birds that are out there. And that's just to get them to the point where they fledge. After they fledge, the parents continue to feed them caterpillars for 24 more days. So it's actually a much bigger figure than that, but it takes thousands and thousands and thousands of caterpillars to make even tiny birds in our landscapes. I had a student, Desiree Narango, who studied the Carolina chickadee in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. Extensively. She had a big NSF grant and a huge team that worked very hard. And what she did was map out the territories of breeding chickadees in typical suburban neighborhoods. And then she also mapped out the plants in those neighborhoods. So she could look at how well chickadees reproduce, how they succeeded in reproduction when most of the plants in the neighborhood were native plants or when they were non-native plants. So this is the typical breeding territory of a chickadee. The star is where the nest is. The red line represents where they did 95% of their foraging. And the blue areas, and notice it's about 50 meters from the nest. That's how far they go when they're foraging for food. The blue areas are the plants on which they did that 95% of the foraging. So let's look at what those plants were. Well, they're all the native trees in this habitat. Basswood and sweet gum, American elm, black cherry, 2 species of oaks. But let's also look at the trees they did not bother to forage on at all, and they're all the non-native trees. Japanese maple, silk tree, ginkgo, black poplar, crepe myrtle, saucer magnolia, leyland cypress. And you might say, well, why don't the chickadees forage in there? How do they know there's no food in there? They don't know. They do go in once and they look around. There's something called optimal foraging where they have to, if they don't encounter a prey item right away, they'll leave. So they don't spend any more time in those trees that don't have any insects in them than you would spend in in an Acme if all the shelves were bare. You'd realize this is not a good place to shop. Well, one of the things Desiree did was to compare chickadee reproductive success in landscapes that were dominated by native plants versus ones that were dominated by introduced plants. And the first thing she found is that there were 75% fewer caterpillars when the landscapes were dominated by introduced plants. So the amount of bird food available for the chickadees was reduced by 75%. Those landscapes, even though they all had nest boxes up in them, they were 60% less likely to have breeding chickadees at all. The chickadees came, they looked around, and nest boxes are limited, or nest holes are limited, so they want to breed there, but they said, there's not enough food here, we're not even going to try. If they did try, their nests contained 1.5 fewer eggs. Those nests were 29% less likely to survive. If they did survive to fledging, they produced 1.2 fewer fledglings, and it took them 1.5 days longer to do that. And if you put all that together into a population growth model, I wish I had a pointer, but I don't. So just follow me here. This is as a percentage of the non-native plants biomass in your landscape. So look at the bottom line there, the x-axis. From landscapes ahead, no non-native plants, all the way to landscapes where 100% of the plant biomass was non-native. The big dotted line in the middle there is called replacement rate. That is the rate at which the population has to make babies in order to replace the adults that die every year. If you make babies at that rate, the population is not growing, but it's not shrinking either. It's a sustainable population. Off to the left here, if you're above that dotted line, if you make more babies than adults die, you have a growing population. But if you make fewer babies, anything below the dotted line, then you have a declining population, an unsustainable population. And where those lines intersect is right around 30% non-native plant biomass. So if your yard, if your landscape exceeds 30% non-native plant biomass, gets up here and toward the right, you're going to have a declining population. There's not enough food there to support chickadee reproduction. And that's true for any other bird that's eating insects. So this is an important study. This is the first time this has ever been measured for any bird anywhere. So people who wonder or doubt whether their plant choice actually influences the ability of birds to reproduce or migrate through or do anything in your yard, you should look at this study. But it also suggests there's an area of compromise here, because you can have a crepe myrtle or something that's not making insects as long as it's less than 30% of the plant biomass in your yard. And that compromise, I think, is very valuable because most people love their non-native plants. They're beautiful non-native plants, and they're not going to give them up easily. So if my message was you can't use any non-native plants, nobody would listen. But you can use a few as long as you dominate your landscape with those powerful native plants. Desiree also looked at the migrants that moved through her territories. 51 species of migrants stopped in her Washington, D.C. study sites. And what they stopped for? Well, they said they're resting. No, they're really looking for insects to eat. And if they came down in an area dominated by ginkgos, for example, that produce 0 caterpillars, that's the end of their migration. Then they can't refuel. I don't know if you've ever run into a bird just sitting in the middle of a parking lot, just shivering during migration. That's a migrant that's run out of fuel. It came down in an area where there is no fuel, and that is the end. So a lot of people say, I don't have a property big enough to support breeding birds, and that alone, and that might be true. But if you have a property big enough to support a single tree and you make it the correct tree, one that's going to produce insects, then you can support migrating birds, and they do stop and use those trees as they move through in migration. What if I said to you that introduced plants are reducing your bank account by 96%? Most people would pay attention to that. We would get that immediately, that, uh-oh, we're living on money. We can't afford to have introduced plants reduce our bank account by 96%. Well, insects are the currency in your ecological bank account. And whether you know it or not, you totally depend on your ecological bank account. It's our ecological bank account that keeps us alive. We can't lose 96% of it. It is simply not an option. So we have two choices. We can create landscapes in which nature thrives, or we can create landscapes that are ecologically dead. So far, we've been pursuing option 2. Well, the first option is going to sustain us. The second one is not going to sustain us. So we need to change. Our only viable option, as far as I'm concerned, is to live sustainably with the natural world that sustains us. Unsustainable practices are just that. They're unsustainable. They don't go on for very long. So we need to start looking at the future, and it's not a future 100 years away. It's happening right now. So how are we going to do this? Well, one of the things we need to think about is private property. 85.6% of the land east of the Mississippi is privately owned. It's 95 or 99% of Texas is privately owned. A huge amount of Texas is privately owned. So we can't ignore private property when we're doing conservation. Private property owners are going to be the key for conservation in the future. Places like this. How are we going to save insects at a landscape like this? I took this picture from a helicopter. It's a typical landscape. in my part of the world. Beautiful, according to some people, but absolutely dead. There's nothing living in that landscape at all. So what are we going to do? How are we going to put those insects back? Well, we have to consider all the causes of insect declines, and there are many. The misuse and overuse of pesticides. Pesticides are important when used properly, but it's very easy to overuse them. Habitat loss, that's that catch-all phrase. You know, when you take away what insects need, that's habitat loss, and we do that all over the place. Non-native ornamentals, I've talked about that. We use them everywhere. That then become invasive species. You know, 85% of our woody invasive plants are escapees from our gardens. So there's no mystery about where they come from. Light pollution, we'll talk about that. Climate change. There's good news here, and that is that the first 5 causes of insect declines are relatively easy to address. The things single people can address. I am not going to make an assignment where you have to change the course of climate change by tomorrow as a single person. We're going to change climate change issues in the voting booth, but these top 5 single people can make a huge difference. What we're talking about is landscapes like this. This is a house down the street from me. This guy loves his lawn. It's a beautiful lawn, but boy, it's a large chunk of the earth that is totally dead so that he can have a beautiful lawn. What we need to do is raise the bar for what we ask our landscapes to do. In the past, we've asked them to be pretty. And I understand that. I mean, plants are beautiful. We think they're just decorations. When we go to the nursery, that's what we look for. Something that's beautiful. Maybe it could be a screen, an anchor, or a focal point, but it's all been about aesthetics with no thought to the ecological role those plants need to start playing in our landscapes. And when we think of plants only as decorations, then landscaping equals ecological destruction. And we have done that everywhere. What we need to do now is look for pretty plants that also produce what we call ecosystem services, that support food webs, the life around us, that protect our watersheds and store carbon and restore soil, moderate our weather, support natural enemy communities, create pollinator habitat, and on and on and on. And when we add function to the criteria that we use when we're selecting plants, then landscaping equals ecological restoration. And I think this type of landscaping is landscaping in the 21st century. It's the future. We've done 20th century landscaping, and we're now in the 6th grade extinction. It's obviously not working real well. So let's give this a try. Okay, we cannot restore ecosystems anywhere without restoring insect populations. That's where I'm going with all this. So let's restore some insect populations. What does it take to make insects? It takes energy. That energy comes from the sun. If you're looking for a miracle on planet Earth, then look at photosynthesis, because it is photosynthesis. It is plants that allows us to eat sunlight. And if we lose our plants, we're going to have to eat sunlight without them. And I wish us luck in that. What do I mean by that? Well, energy from the sun is absorbed by the plant. So is carbon dioxide from the air, removing it from our from the atmosphere so that it's not causing climate change. Water. You combine all those together, and that produces oxygen in the photosynthetic reaction, but it turns the energy of the sun into food. The energy is now locked up in the carbon bonds of simple sugars and carbohydrates, which is the food that drives everything on the planet, with the minor exception of some sulfur-based food webs at the bottom of the ocean. So let's just say plants are making all the food. So to make insects, first we need to make plants. Okay, simple enough. Which insects are we going to make? We got a lot of them out there. 3 to 4 million species of insects worldwide. And the reason I say 3 to 4 is we haven't identified most of them. We got about 164,000 species in the US, but again, many undescribed species. We're not going to have all of them in our yard, so we have to focus. And I'm suggesting that we focus on the 2 most important groups of insects, the ones that maintain the plant diversity, those plants that are capturing the energy from the sun, because they truly are the first trophic level, the ones that are the most important, and the insects that contribute the most energy to food webs. In other words, the insects that transfer the energy that those plants capture to other organisms. So we're talking about our pollinators, and we're talking about caterpillars, believe it or not. Now, who says these are the 2 most important groups of insects? I do, and I'm giving this talk, so I get to say that. Somewhere somebody's going to say, oh no, they're not the most important, but we could certainly make a case for it. Let's start with those pollinators. We hear a lot about pollinators. Everybody talking about pollinators. And what we hear is we need pollinators because they pollinate a third of our crops. May Berenbaum, University of Illinois, probably the second most famous entomologist in the world, behind EO, looked at the data that says they pollinate a third of our crops. And it's really about 1/7 of our crops. So, and if looking at the way we eat with unhealthy diets, it's more like 1/12 of our crops depend on pollinators. So we're not saving our pollinators to save our crops. We're saving our pollinators because they pollinate 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. If we lost our pollinators, we would lose 80 to 90% of the plants on the planet. Not an option. Nothing to do with agriculture. We need plants everywhere, which means we need pollinators everywhere, not just in our parks and our preserves. This is not good land stewardship. This is essential land stewardship, something that absolutely has to happen. But to do that, we have to know what a pollinator is. You know, most people go out and look at their plants, they see insects on them, and they say, well, there are our pollinators. Well, no, most of those are what we call flower visitors. They are there using the resources of the flower. A lot of things like nectar, a lot of things eat pollen, but not that many things transfer the pollen from the male part of the flowers to the female parts of the flowers. Those are the true pollinators. Who are our best pollinators? Well, we've got one species of honeybee, the European honeybee, which is introduced, and that gets the most attention because it is important for our crops. But we have 4,000 species of native bees that don't get enough attention, and 14,000 species of moths and butterflies. Now, there is no doubt that bees are much better pollinators in general than moths and butterflies, but there are a number of particularly specialized moths that the plants actually depend on. You're not going to have the plants without those moths. And because there's so many species of them, and because they do their pollination mostly at night when nobody's looking, it turns out they're a lot more important in pollination than they are given credit for. So let's first talk about the 14,000 species of native bees. But to do that, we have to understand what a bee is. You know, when I suggest to people, you've got to start landscaping your property so that we can maintain populations of native bees in your yard. They say, absolutely not. I don't want any bees because I don't want to be stung. And I said, no. The native bees aren't going to sting you. 90% of them are solitary, which means they're not protecting a hive. They're not aggressive. You can pet them. They are not a stinging risk. And they say, I don't believe you. I was stung last week. And what they really mean is they were stung by this guy, a yellow jacket. So yellow jackets and paper wasps get blamed as bees all the time. And honeybees, they do sting. It's not the native bees that are doing the stinging, it's these other guys. So just because you're stung doesn't mean it was by a native bee. And I'm not encouraging having yellow jackets or bald-faced hornets in your yard. They are aggressive. They're actually predators, and they're eating my caterpillars all the time. So let's focus on those native bees. I'm not saying you should have a honeybee colony in your yard. Let's focus on the bees that would be there naturally without you doing anything except giving them what they need. So what do they need? They need a place to live and something to eat. Where do they live? Well, they live in the ground, and they live inside either woody stems or pithy stems. Let's talk about the ground nesters first because they're the most common. 70% of our native bees are ground nesters, and it's easiest to see them in the spring before all the leaves come out and block where they're nesting. This is a little Chickadee bee. She has dug a tunnel in the ground, and then she has side shoots off that tunnel, which she packs full of pollen and lays an egg, and then she'll close up this hole. There she is. They're very shy, you know. As soon as a shadow hits them, they dive back in. They'll be flying around. It looks like, oh, they're angry at you. They're not. They're just trying to find their hole. So 70% ground nesting bees. So if you want to help ground nesting bees, all you need is ground. And most people who own property do have ground. They like little bare spots, and they like slightly south sloping areas. It doesn't have to be much, just a few degrees, because the sun hits them and warms them up first. And they also like soil that is relatively easy to dig, although there are bees that will dig in the hardest clay. So don't worry too much about your soil type, but You don't want to be mowing an area where you're going to have bees. You don't want to be trampling it. You don't want to be putting down pesticides. Pithy and woody stem nesters do this. They have a tunnel either in wood or a pithy stem, and they make these cells. They pack them full of pollen sequentially. So the one to the right is the oldest one. They laid an egg on it. That's what a bee larva looks like, this little thing that has no legs or head or antennae or anything, and it eats the pollen. The one in the middle is younger, so it's smaller, and the one to the left is even younger. And when they mature, they pupate in those cells, and then they exit right out the side of the stem. So by pithy stems, I'm talking about the things that we leave up over the wintertime, things like goldenrod stems or evening primrose, all the stuff that we say, oh, is dead and we got to cut it all down. That's where a lot of our bees are nesting the following year, and it's where they overwinter so many species. So when we cut it down or mulch it, we've just gotten rid of the resource that 30% of our native bees need. This is a challenge for homeowners because it does look dead, and it looks like you're not being a good citizen. Heather Holm has found that if you cut it off maybe 1.5, 2 feet from the ground, so you can remove the top part, that's where they do most of the nesting, is closer to the ground. So that's one option. But you don't want to ever cut this stuff off in the fall, because look at the seed heads up there. That's what our overwintering birds eat all winter long. They eat the seeds from our meadow plants. So we want to leave them up every place we can. Woody stem nesters are doing exactly the same thing, but they like wood that's very, very soft. Things like elderberry. So here they have tunneled out of, those are completed nesting cells, and they've tunneled out the side. But what do we do with our elderberry and our other dead stems? We prune them out to make it look nice and neat. So there's usually a shortage of woody nesting sites on our properties. So what we've done is invent these bee hotels, and bee hotels are very popular, particularly with people. People love to make bee hotels. They go crazy doing it, although the bees do use bee hotels. But there is a problem with bee hotels that research has identified, and that is when you make big bee hotels, and when it's the only bit of wood option on your property, then all the bees nest in one place. And that is exactly what predators or diseases are looking for. We're putting all our bees in the same basket, and then they can wipe them all out in one place. It is far better to make small bee hotels and scatter them throughout your property, so that if an enemy finds any one bee hotel, it won't take out all of your bees. What do bees need to reproduce? They need pollen and they need nectar, of course, but they need it all the time. These are data from New England. Jared Fowler's work in New England shows that there are native bees out from March all the way to November in New England. So in Texas, they're probably out all year long. I'm not sure, but what that means is you need forage all year long. You need a sequence of blooming plants to provide the bees with what they need throughout most of the year for sure. What species of plants should we use for our native bees? Well, Sam Droege is Mr. Native Bee, works at the Patuxent Wildlife Research Center in Maryland. And he says, we need to meet the needs of our specialist bees. Now we've got 4,000 species of native bees. A third of them, at least a third of them, so over 1,000 species of native bees are highly specialized. They can only reproduce on the pollen of particular plant genera. Those are the plants we should plant, because the generalist bees can use those plants as well. If you only plant for the generalist bees, you've lost all your specialists. Why do bees specialize? They specialize because the interaction between a plant and a bee is it's a mutualistic one. The plant wants its pollen to be moved from the female parts of the flower to the male parts. So they form a relationship over the years with bees that have hairs that are exactly the right shape and size. Their pollen grains become adapted to those hairs, where they've got little nungies on them that attach to those hairs in just the right way. They offer they look different, they flower at different times, they smell differently, they have different pollen morphology, as I said, and their nutritional value is very different. So bees can specialize on particular plant genera and get really good at moving those pollen grains and using that nutrition in a way that other bee species wouldn't be good at doing. So the flower wants the specialist bee to be the primary pollinator and wants to avoid everybody else. So they're trying to defend themselves from those other bees. And that's why you got a lot of specialization out there. What are the best plants for specialist bees in Texas? Your various perennial and annual sunflower species are really good. Your asters, your goldenrods. See these numbers here, bee species, those are way underestimated. We know a lot more now, just ignore those. So the sunflowers, the asters, goldenrods, willows are really good because they're one of the first things to bloom in the spring. So they're really important for specialist bees in the spring. But this list will tell you some of the very best ones, but ignore those numbers. Those numbers probably are not accurate. The handout I gave you, that's much more up to date. Okay, that's all we're going to say about bees right now. We got to move on to talk about that other group, those caterpillars that are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of insect, actually any other type of animal. If you remove caterpillars from a system, most of the energy remains locked up in plants because most animals don't eat plants directly. They eat something that ate plants, and that something is insects, mostly caterpillars. So how do we increase the number of caterpillars in our yards? You do that by putting the plants in your yard that make caterpillars. Makes sense, but most plants don't make a lot of caterpillars. So here's elderberry. It's a great plant for pollinators, great plant for making berries for birds. It's a very poor plant for making caterpillars. Almost nothing eats elderberry. Why is that? Well, plants don't want to be eaten, and some plants are really, really good at defending themselves from insect or herbivores. They load their leaves with nasty tasting chemicals that make those plants either bitter or downright toxic, and it's a really good defense that keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world. And that's why it's green out there. Not because there are no insects out there that want to eat those plants. It's green because most of the insects that are out there cannot eat most of the plants. And if you don't believe me, after this talk, go outside and eat a plant and see if you like it. You're not going to like it. It works on you as well. But we do know that insects eat plants. So how do they do that? How do they get around the defenses that are in all of those plants? They do it through host plant specialization. 90% of the insects that eat plants can only develop and reproduce on particular plant lineages. Every single plant lineage out there protects itself in a particular way. Insects can adapt to all of those ways. They specialize. And they develop the enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify particular chemicals, the behavioral adaptations, the life history adaptations that allow them to eat particular plant lineages without dying. But they don't develop the adaptations that help them to eat other plants. They haven't had the time to do that. And it takes a long period of exposure to each of those plant lineages for all those adaptations to fall into place. So for example, here's Crepe Myrtle, one of the most popular ornamental plants in the entire country. It doesn't support any caterpillars. It's a pretty decoration, but it's not going to support any of the food webs that we're trying to support. So plant choice matters. For example, if I want to attract the Pandora Sphinx, and who wouldn't want to attract the Pandora Sphinx? I need Virginia creeper. That's what it's specialized on. Tulip tree silk moths need tulip tree. Luna moths need sweet gum. Now it depends on where you are in the country. Where I am, Luna moths need sweet gum, but in other places they focused on black walnut. They have a pretty broad list of plants they will eat, but not in any one given area. In any one given area, they're pretty specialized. Zebra swallowtails need pawpaws. These are all things that we have at our house. And just examples. Grapes are very powerful. Native grapes are really powerful plants. You get things like the 8-spotted forester moth, the green marvel on viburnum. Goldenrod supports 110 species of caterpillars at my house. Like the brown hooded owlet, gorgeous caterpillar. Even poison ivy, beautiful Utilia on poison ivy. And I know what you're thinking. Poison ivy, I'm not going to tolerate poison ivy. You know when you get poison ivy? When you're trying to pull it out. Ignore it. The best defense against poison ivy is to learn what it looks like and just don't touch it. You can run faster than it can. It doesn't chase you. And it makes really valuable berries for the birds in the fall time. They're very, very high in fat. That's what the birds want. Persimmon gives us the sculptured moth. Black gum gives us the Hebrew. Our beleaguered ashes give us a number of sphinx moths, like the beautiful fawn sphinx. I think that's art in the garden, just a gorgeous caterpillar. Maples, very powerful plants, give us things like the rosy maple moth. My favorite large moth is the royal walnut moth on walnut and hickory. This moth is already extirpated from New England. We've already lost it. Double-tooth prominent on elm. Witch hazel will give us the witch hazel dagger moth. Pines are really important, particularly in Texas, gives us the imperial moth and many others. Our native clematis even gives us specialists like the spotted thyrus. Ironwood gives us the two-toned ancillus, buttonbush, lost owlet, native willows, the herald. Snowberry clearwing is on coral honeysuckle. That's the native honeysuckle, not the non-native. Evening primrose moth, of course, is on evening primrose, and they even spend the day with their heads stuck in the flowers. Very cute. The showy emerald is on sumac, not poison sumac. I've never even seen poison sumac. That's a plant of the swamp, but the staghorn and smooth sumacs use great soil stabilizers. You never have to use a non-native plant to stabilize soil. You can get it with the sumacs. Then there's a couple plants that are really powerful, like native prunus. I think you have at least five different species of native prunus in your area of Texas. And it'll support things like the white furcula, the crocus geometer, the Io moth, the beautiful cecropia moth, the colorful zale, the tufted bird dropping moth. And I ask you, who would not want the tufted bird dropping moth in their yard? It's just fun to say. The paddle caterpillar. Ask your kids what those paddles are for. They have a function. They're not there for decorations. They have a function. Get them to think about it. Put down their iPhone and think about what those those paddles are for. And I'm not going to tell you what they're for. They have to figure it out. You have to figure it out. It's the same reason that the filament geometer has these expandable filaments on its back. These guys are all on cherries. That's what prunus is. Small-eyed sphinx. The Harris's 3-spot has a little umbrella of shed head capsules that it holds over its head. Nobody knew why that was until they actually saw something attack one of these caterpillars, and they whip it around like a weapon and whack them with it. Oaks. Oaks are the most powerful plants we can put in our yards, and they support things like the hag moth that looks like a tarantula, the red wash prominent, the white dotted prominent, the spiny oak caterpillar, the skiff moth, the white blotched heterocampa, the oak skeletonizer, the solitary oak leaf miner, the crown butylatrix, the half oval ancillus, the pink striped oakworm, my very, very favorite caterpillar, the spun glass slug caterpillar. They're called slug caterpillars because you can't see their heads. They're not slimy like slugs. They are really caterpillars. Plus hundreds more species are on oaks. Oaks are what we call keystone plants, and they are invaluable in our landscapes. If we're trying to put the insects back, we have to use keystone plants. If you think of a Roman arch, the stone in the middle of the Roman arch is called a keystone. If you take that stone out, the arch collapses. Well, that's the same with the keystone plants in our food webs. If we take them out of our food webs, the food web collapses. By the way, why am I calling it food web instead of food chain? Because they're not linear. The oaks, for example, support hundreds of species, not a single one species. So if you lose that oak, you lose hundreds of species. It looks more like a spider web than a linear chain. Keystone plants, only about 5% of our native plants are making it 75% of the food that drives our food web. So that becomes a really important 5%. In the San Antonio area, 478 species of caterpillars are on oaks, critically important plants. Where did I take all the pictures I just showed you? I took them in my yard, and that's what my yard looked like when we moved in. That's what it looked like a couple of years ago. We put some plants back, and I'm counting the moth species that are there. I'm up to 1,012 species of moths on this piece of property here, 1,012 species. So we have 10 acres. We live in Pennsylvania, which is 2.4 million acres. And on our 10 acres, so far, I'm not through counting, so far I have documented 39% of all the moths that live in Pennsylvania, all of Pennsylvania, on 1/240,000th of the land area. It just shows you that when you put the right plants back, you can attract all this life to your yard. The declining insects, that's real, but we can reverse it by choosing the right plants. Why do we have all those plants? Because we planted the plants on the left and others, and we tolerated the plants on the right. So a lot of people consider black cherry to be a weed. Virginia creeper, oh, it's a weed. Goldenrod's a weed, and they get rid of all those things. Poison ivy, certainly greenbrier. You know, a weed is a plant out of place. None of those plants are out of place, and they all support valuable diversity in our yard. So try to be more tolerant of the native plants that want to be on your landscapes. And when we add these caterpillars to our yards, we're also adding the birds that eat them, like wood thrush. Now, our yard was mowed for hay when we moved in. There was no forest there. Wood thrush is a bird of the forest. It has now come back because our trees are 20 years old. That doesn't sound very old, but you know, they're 40, 50 feet tall, and we've got enough food to support their reproduction. Because we have a Virginia creeper, we got the lettered sphinx, and that's what this bird is feeding its baby right there. We have indigo bunnings because we have alders that support ribby quakers. We have chipping sparrows because we have black walnuts that support gray-edged bomolokas. We have field sparrows because we have oaks making those red-line panapodas. We have tufted titmice because we have black cherries making dowdy pinions. We have phoebes nesting on our light fixture over our front porch because we got a lot of native grasses making skippers. We got robins because we have all those weeds, those native plants making white-line sphinx and many other moths. We've got chickadees, Caroline chickadees, because we have tulip trees making tulip tree beauty, white-eyed vireas because we have spice bush making spice bush swallowtail. We have house wren because we have hickories making copper underwings, and we have bluebirds because we have sycamores making drab prominence. As a matter of fact, we have 58 species of birds that have bred successfully on our property because we put the plants back that make all those insects. We have reestablished functional relationships in our yard that was pretty barren when we moved in. So by choosing the right plants and using more of them, we've demonstrated that we really can make insects nearly everywhere. I'm going to end with 9 things you can do to restore ecosystem function in your yard by restoring the natives that live there. And the first one I'm going to talk about is cutting your lawn in half. We have 40 million acres of lawn in this country. That's the size of New England. It's a deadscape that looks like this. I propose we cut it in half and create what I call a new national park, homegrown national park, 20 million acres in size. You know, I drive by this church in Mississippi. Everybody's inside worshiping God's creation, and on the outside, they're killing them with this giant lawn because we're not thinking. Plant for specialist bees, we talked about that. Remove invasive species from your property. We certainly talked about that. Invasive species from other continents don't have those specialized relationships, so they can't support the insects that we're talking about. Some of the major invasive species in your area include Nandina. I don't know if you know it, but Nandina berries are filled with cyanide. And birds will eat them when they run out of other berries, and when they do, they die. So when you plant Nandina, you're planting a plant that has the potential of killing birds like cedar waxwings and other things. Chinese tallow, China berry, privets, genus ligustrum, all highly invasive in your area, and many, many others. So if you have those on your property, please get rid of them. Use those keystone plants. We talked about that. How do you find out what a keystone plant is in your area? You go to Native Plant Finder and the National Wildlife Federation website, put in your zip code, and the ranked list of both woody plants on the left and herbaceous plants on the right will pop up for your county. So anywhere in the country, you can find out what the best plants are for your particular county in terms of supporting those food webs. Landscape for caterpillars. What am I talking about here? Well, we have to landscape in a way that allows caterpillars to complete their development. I live in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where their oaks support 511 species of caterpillars. A few of them, like the polyphemus moth here, completes its development on the tree. The caterpillars eat the leaves, it spins a cocoon and hangs from the twigs, and then it emerges as an adult and does it all over again. I wish everything did that, but that's not true. 480 of the species, 94%, drop from the tree. They pupate in the soil, they wiggle themselves below the soil, make a little chamber and form a pupa like this, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter under the tree. The problem is we don't have leaf litter under the trees anymore, and we compact our soil by mowing it and trampling it so much that the caterpillars can't get underground. So if these trees produce any caterpillars, they fall to the ground and then die. I'm sure that this is a major cause of insect declines. And of course, the cement landscape is even worse. This is what we do mostly. We have big lawns and we put a tree in there. Now, nobody's measured how well caterpillars can complete their development in a situation like this, but I guarantee they can do better in a situation like this, where you have a tree, you've got a layered landscape. There's a native azalea, you could have a dogwood underneath that, over top of that. As an understory tree, you've got ferns and ground cover. The caterpillar would drop down, the ground is soft, it can get underground or it can spin its cocoon. It's never going to be mowed or trampled on in a landscape like that. This is where you can do your spring ephemeral gardening. This is how you shrink your lawn. You put beds around your trees and that takes a lot of grass out and turns it into a living landscape where your moths are going to be able to complete their development. You can use your ground covers like wild ginger or May-apples or native pachysandra or foamflower or countless others that are appropriate for your region, all safe sites for caterpillars. Reduce light pollution. If we bring all these insects to our yard, but then we have night lights on at night, we're killing them. Lights particularly kill moths at night, and they do it in lots of different ways. The moths fly around and die from exhaustion. They collide with the light and get incinerated. They die from dehydration. The bat comes and picks them off. Night lights blind nocturnal insects a lot of the time. Who knew? And it changes their daily activities to the point where they're not reproducing the way they ought to. Research, a lot of it from Europe, has shown that light pollution is one of the major causes of insect declines. And this is pretty good news because it's easy to turn off the lights. That's how you reduce light pollution, turn off the lights. But I know what you're going to say. I can't turn off my light because the bad man will come. Okay, put a motion sensor on your security light so it only turns on when the bad man does come. And the first thing you're going to notice is that the bad man doesn't come very often. And if you don't want to do that, take the white light out of your security light and put in a yellow bulb, because yellow wavelengths are far less attractive to night insects than our white wavelengths. And yellow LED lights are the least attractive. If we all switch to yellow LED lights, we could save billions of insects overnight and a lot of energy. Oppose mosquito spraying. Here's Mosquito Joe, and he's going around doing everything, undoing everything that I recommend we do. And he will tell you, well, my fog only kills mosquitoes. Not even close to true. It kills all the insects it comes in contact with. If there were any, I mean, those are all non-native plants, but if they had any caterpillars on them, he's just gassed them all. Or he'll also say, well, this is a natural product, so it's totally safe. It is a natural product. It's pyrethroids, but cyanide is a natural product too. Remember the Nandina? Not perfectly safe. So the best way to control mosquitoes. I know most of our mosquitoes that give us problems are invasive species themselves. Aedes aegypti, it's from Egypt. The Asian tiger mosquito, these things we all brought in. But the best way is with mosquito dunks. You get a bucket of water, put hay or straw in it and let it ferment for a couple days. It's irresistible to mosquitoes that want to lay their eggs. So they lay their eggs in that bucket. Then you throw in a mosquito dunk that you get from the hardware store. That's Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a disease, a bacillus that will only kill aquatic diptera. So you only want to use them in a bucket like this. You don't want to throw them in a natural area because then you're killing things like chironomids, midges that are very valuable. But in these buckets, it's only going to kill the mosquito. It's very targeted and it works much better and is much cheaper than mosquito gel. As a matter of fact, minimize insecticide use overall. Homeowners use more pesticides per acre than is used in agriculture, believe it or not. And by some figures, it's a crazy amount, like 10 times more. I don't know how they measure that, but why do we do that? Because we don't like insects, and that's not a good reason. There is a good reason if you're trying to control termites because they will eat your house, but almost everything else is totally harmless, and we've got to cut our emotional tie to pesticides there. Not only that, we're laying down a pesticide vapor that who knows what that does to us cancer-wise years down the road. Very tough to measure, but if it's strong enough to kill insects, it's not going to be good for us. Finally, your homeowners association. Join your homeowners association and change from within. Let's focus on that for just a second. People say, I'm not allowed to do anything you said because my homeowners association says I can't do it. Well, become a member of your homeowners association. Those laws, those rules were made back in the 70s to convince everybody that you live in a high-class neighborhood. Well, the future is the high-class neighborhood is going to be the one that's alive with a lot of biodiversity. It's not going to be the deadscape. We've learned a lot since those rules were made. It's just that, you know, we haven't thought we're allowed to change them. People made those rules, people can change them through education. Okay, I'm going to end with the way I started with E.O. Wilson. In 2016, he wrote this book, Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight to Save Life. And his message was very simple. We're not going to save life on Earth, and that includes our own, unless we preserve ecosystem function on half of the planet. Remember, half of the planet is in agriculture, which means we're going to have to save it in the other half. And that's where we live, our 7.8 billion of us, all of our infrastructure. How is this going to be possible? And most people just say, well, EO's gotten too old. He's dreaming. He is dreaming, but you know what? I think it is possible. We can realize his dream of saving ecosystem function on half the Earth if we adopt a new approach to conservation. The old approach was to have humans here and nature someplace else. That will not work. There is no someplace else anymore. We need to save nature now where humans abound. The UN designates biosphere reserves as places of ecological significance. And I hate that terminology because it suggests they're places on planet Earth with no ecological significance. Not so. Every square inch of the planet has ecological significance, including our yards, including our corporate landscapes, including our roadsides, including all of the human-dominated landscapes where we haven't thought about preserving nature. It doesn't mean we have to save biodiversity for a living, but you can save it where you live. I like this approach because it empowers each one of us. Right now the Earth's problems are so huge, so many of us feel powerless. They feel, there's nothing one person can do, but that's just not true. You can go out and address these issues on your little piece of the Earth. And if you don't own a piece of the Earth, volunteer on a piece of the Earth near you. Maybe a little old lady who owns a piece of property can't do any of this. You can help her, or volunteer in a park or a preserve. Shrink the lawn, put in those keystone plants, add pollinator garden, and get rid of your invasive species. And if everybody did that on their private property, we'd be about 80% done. It also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't worry about the entire planet's problems. That will depress you. Just do those things we talked about on your little piece of the Earth, and then you've made a significant contribution. So as property owners or as volunteers, each one of us has the power and we have the responsibility to fix dead landscapes like this. Nobody's going to do it by themselves, but collectively we can do it together. We, in fact, are nature's best hope. Thanks very much. Break time.
Oh, Dr. Tallamy, that was stunning and such a concise and clear course of action we should be taking. And if it's all right with you, we would like to open for some questions before break.
Sure.
Very good.
Are you doing something with screen share or?
No, you can stop sharing if you prefer, or you can leave the cardinal up there.
My pointer has disappeared, so I can't click on anything.
Oh goodness. Well, let me.
We'll worry about that later.
Sure.
Let's do questions.
It might be because I have the mouse right now.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah. So I'm going to work backwards. So what is the common name of if I'm pronouncing it correctly, chromis, and that's coming from Miss Joanne Collins, who's actually a good partner of ours from the Native Prairie organization up in Dallas.
Okay, I missed it. The common name of what?
I believe it's CRUMUS is one of your caterpillars, maybe, or
CRUMES.
And Joanne, if you'd like to clarify, feel free. And
that looks like crowns to me, and I'm missing something here. I'll give you the common name as soon as I figure out what we're talking about.
Sure, no problem. Okay, the next one we had was, let's see. There was a particular species. Are there species that nest in giant amaranthus? And that's from a good friend of ours, Miss Miller.
You mean species of birds or insects that use it?
I believe that question was when we were talking about native bees in our area.
Okay, native bees.
Thanks, Jeannie.
I'm sure there are. I can't tell you exactly what they are, but Jared Fowler could. He's the guy looking at specialist bees, but I'm sure there are.
And Ms. Chandra, also an advocate for everything you were speaking about. She just wanted to comment that we could start a campaign, Biotithe, giving 10% of your property to biodiversity. Yeah, Janina, I'll take that.
That's good, but let's give 50% of our property to biodiversity. Let's be more generous.
Sure. She actually has a question regarding adapted species, non-native species that are considered invasive, like the plumbungo. Plumbungo. Sorry, I know what the word is, but I'm sorry. Plumbango. Somebody help me out. So this non-native species is very common. Would plants like that still add to the decline of insects?
Yes, because they don't support as many insects as the natives that they displaced. So they're occupying space that used to be occupied by a plant that made a lot of insects. So just by that, we're transferring a low productivity plant with a we're taking the high productivity plant out and putting in a low productivity plant. So, over big spaces, that does reduce insects.
And Ms. Miller asks, in terms of birds, is migration a form of resource partitioning?
I guess if you're comparing the resources over the globe and say, well, the birds that migrate are using the temperate zone resources and the ones that don't are using the tropical resources. But that's typically not the way resource partitioning is thought of. It's usually in a very local space where they divide up the resources locally. Migration is an adaptation to take advantage of a bonanza of resources that appear ephemerally. So you migrate, you use them, and then you leave when you're done with them. And that's what migration. That's why the great herds in Africa migrate. You've got a flush of grass after it rains, and they migrate up to take advantage of that, and then they move off and follow the rains. So that's what drives migration all over the world. It's patchiness of resources that come and go.
Okay, and final question before our 5-minute break here. How can we cite, this comes from Ms. Miller again, how can we cite the population growth that showed the non-native species?
You mean
Miller,
what's the?
She means that graph about the non-native species. The population growth of the non-native species. She wants
you mean the chickadee, the Desiree Naranjo one? My PhD student's graph.
Yes, she says.
Yeah,
yes.
that's a paper in Proceedings in National Academy of Sciences, and I can, if somebody sends me an email, I can send you the citation.
Okay, I will do that and get back with Ms. Miller.
Yeah, do that because I will forget.
Will do. Well, very good, everybody. We would like to have everybody take a rest for about 5 minutes. I am going to start the timer, and go warm up that coffee, let out that dog, and we'll see you back in 5 minutes. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, I'm going to take a break too.
That's right. All right, everybody, 15 seconds. You're on back. Joanne, that's pretty funny. No problem, Miss Sherry. We're gonna make sure to have the recording available.
I've got that reference that I can show in the beginning. If I don't know if they're going to copy it down or not, but
Oh, very good. Yeah, and I think your thing is still. I'm sorry, your screen is actually still visible to us, so that works really well too.
oh, I'm still screen sharing
Yeah.
because there it is. If that's
If you want, there's a chat. So if you wanted to copy and paste that into the chat.
okay, I can try it. Yeah,
That'll work.
copy. So chat.
Right.
Let's go like this.
The very last, you open it up, and then there's a little line below there that shows you kind of where to put it. It's not in the main block, but you should see everybody else's chat just pop up just now.
Okay, I did it.
All right. Hopefully that helps. Thanks, everybody.
All
Okay.
right.
If not, I'll just email you the details there. So, well, welcome back, everybody. This is actually a second part of our installment where Dr. Tallamy has agreed to kind of go over some frequently asked questions, and he has a few slides dedicated to that. So he's welcome to fire those up. But also, this is an opportunity to keep thinking about questions you would like answered on behalf of maybe your school, or we're not against, you know, your personal property either, and maybe how he can further help kind of guide you for whatever gardening and support that you can lend these pollinators and insects. And Dr. Tallamy, you're welcome to have the floor.
Okay. This is the most frequently asked question that I get, and that is, are cultivars of native plants functionally as good as the straight species? And the reason I get that question is because people say, okay, I want to plant native plants, and they go to the nursery, and almost everything for sale is a cultivar of a native plant. So it's a good question. Let's just talk about what a cultivar is so that we understand that. It's a genetic variant of a particular species. So it's not a hybrid. A hybrid is a cross between two different species. And typically hybrids, when you're involving natives, are a cross between a native and a non-native. So right away, they're not going to be as functionally good as the straight species. But otherwise, a cultivar is just a genetic trait, and they come from different places. A lot of cultivars were actually found in nature. So for example, Acer rubrum October Glory, that's red maple October Glory, is a cultivar that was simply found in nature. Somebody was walking through the woods and they saw a red maple that was really red, and they said, okay, I'm gonna clone that, and then they'll sell it, and they put the cultivar name on there, October Glory, but it was produced by nature. So in that case, there's no reason to suspect it wouldn't be as functional as any other genetic variant of red maple. But a lot of cultivars are created by artificial selection, particularly cultivars of flowers, where the flower trait is enlarged, maybe the petals are enlarged or the color is changed. I mean, right now we have echinaceas that look like zinnias, and the horticultural trade has been convinced for a century, and we've certainly supported this notion, and that is that we're only going to buy beautiful plants, and that plants are just decorations. So that's what they're trying to produce when they make a cultivar. Well, when you're talking about flowers, I'll talk about that first because we didn't do any research on that. Annie White in University of Vermont has looked at what happens when you change flower traits. And more often than not, it does hurt pollination, not entirely, or not. I mean, it's not totally predictable. Sometimes it actually enhances it. But when you fool with the energy budget of a flower, flowers have very highly regulated energy budgets. You got this much energy for the flower, and if you make the petals much bigger than they used to be, you're going to have less energy for the nectar and the pollen. If you change petal color, you probably change not just the colors we see, but the UV spectrum. Bees find flowers very much through the UV spectrum, and if you change that, you all of a sudden the bee doesn't recognize it anymore. So the chances that you change something that a specialist bee is going to be attracted to are very high when you start fooling around with flowers. This is an exception to that. This is Phlox paniculata, and it was a natural variant found in Georgia, I think. But I think Jenna found it, and so she gets the name. But it has twice as many flowers as the straight species. So it turns out to be much more attractive to butterflies than the straight species in terms of the amount of nectar that is provided, and they're all over it. So that's an exception. And you'll be able to see right away if you start planting these things you buy from the nursery, whether or not they are being used by butterflies or bees. We did a study funded by Mount Cuba Center in Delaware, where we actually compared the traits on woody plants that are typically selected for. So we were looking at whether these traits actually changed the use of the leaves of these plants. And these are the 6 traits that we looked at: when you enhance fall color, when you enlarge fruit size, when you introduce disease resistance, when you change leaf color. So when you take a green leaf and you make it red or purple or variegated, what happens? When you change the plant habit. So in other words, if you take a tall plant and make it short, and then flower color and size, we didn't look at that. And what we did was have a common garden experiment where we planted the straight species. You don't have to worry about all this. We planted the stray species and put the cultivars of that stray species around it. And then we measured insect use for 3 years. So those were the things that we looked at. Just to cut to the chase here, the only trait that reduced insect use was taking a green leaf and making it red or purple. Nothing else consistently changed insect use. And that makes sense because when you make a green leaf red or purple, you are introducing anthocyanins. It's a chemical that gives it the red color. And anthocyanins are feeding deterrents. So there you're taking a good native plant that insects will use for growth and reproduction and making it unusable by making that leaf red or purple. And that happens to be a favorite cultivar of ours. So a lot of people buy red bud, but they want the red leaf one. I don't know why. I think they're ugly. But just be aware of that. If you're trying to maintain ecological use, avoid those red leaf colors. The one thing that I really don't like about cultivars is that they typically are propagated clonally. Meaning that they just take cuttings and they take the single genotype and reproduce it over and over again. So they don't lose the trait that was selected for. The problem with putting clones in our yards is that that's zero genetic variability. And with today's wildly fluctuating weather patterns that we have driven by climate change, we need as much genetic variability in the environment as possible. So that's an issue. But otherwise, functionally, cultivars don't necessarily have to detract function. They typically do with flowers, though. Okay, another frequently asked question is if we restore roadsides. So we got 4 million miles of roads, and each one of them has 2 sides, and it's a lot of area that could be used for habitat restoration. And of course, Texas has its giant wildflower, the Ladybird Johnson roadside restoration sites that are all over the place. You've got your Texas bluebonnets and very attractive things. The question is, when you put these along roads, are we creating ecological traps or not? This is a typical median. And there's a lot of, it's mowed at this point, but it could be well planted with milkweeds or a bunch of other things. Does that increase or decrease insect mortality along roads? That is the question. So this is the Taconic Parkway in New York. And so is this. This is the Taconic Parkway in Newark. There's the median. It's planted with a forest. And the reason it went from this to this is that when they made the Taconic Parkway back in the 20s and 30s, I think it was a patchwork of farmland and woodlots. And when it was farmland, they just planted it in grass. But when it was woodlots, they left it. They just made the road through it. So a lot of people say, oh, you can't have this because the animals will hide there and it'll increase road mortality. They'll run out and cause accidents. That's never been borne out by research. There's no more animal kill in a situation like this than there is in a situation like this. So that's an urban legend that's not supported by data. But the question is, do you have more insect kills when you have it well planted like this than like this? So we did a study, actually in Florida, they have very broad roadsides. And there are a number of people, but Eleanor Dietrich has led a program to increase or decrease mowing along these edges because it's the only place that a number of Florida wildflowers remain. A number of them are endangered species. So this is what a lot of Florida roadside habitats look like when you don't mow. They do maintain a little strip here so a car can pull off. But again, the question is, are you drawing insects in so that you can kill them on the road or not? Because there you go, cars do smash insects. So we did a study not too many years ago where we actually looked at insect kills in 3 different roadside habitats: when the roadside was lawn, when it was meadow, or when it was wooded, and when it had a median strip and when it didn't have a median strip. And I don't want to belabor this, but there was no difference between roadkill when it was lawn and meadow, which surprised us because we thought there wouldn't be any insects in the lawn, but actually they're traveling across the lawn because there's nothing there and flying out into the road. Woodlot had the lowest amount of insect kill because there's simply not as many blooming plants to draw in the things that are active during the day. But in all cases, when there was a median strip with these types of road edges, insect kill went way up. And that's because there's no way insects can get to that median strip without crossing traffic. So medians as a place for insect restoration sites, we ought to think about that a little bit more before we jump into that. We did notice that guardrails deterred insects. So for example, they'd fly up, they'd hit the guardrail and apparently just turn around. So we might be able to put up artificial barriers when there's habitat on this side to prevent insects from going into the road. If we get serious about this. There are a lot of areas along roads, though, that could be good habitat that right now aren't. This is a rest stop on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. They have these huge areas of lawn, I guess so you can walk your dog or something. These could be well planted and you know, be valuable sites of restoration. And so could areas where there's slow moving traffic like clover leaves. Getting on and getting off of highways. Those are often just big lawns. They all have to be mowed, a lot of energy input that could be improved for habitat. I want to talk briefly about your coffee buying habits. I'm getting more and more questions about this because people hear about shade coffee being good for the birds. We drink a lot of coffee. 400 million cups a day. We've got 167 million coffee drinkers. Now, I don't drink all of that, but I drink a lot of it. So I'm guilty. I'm a coffee drinker, and these are the areas of the world where coffee is grown. Let's just focus on the New World here. I don't know if you know where the migrating birds go, but this map of where we grow coffee is almost identical to where most of the migrants go. The neotropical migrants all go down in here. Not too many go this far south, but some of them do. And we've got 5.4 million hectares, which is, you know, it's over 10 million acres of coffee farms in those areas where we have a lot of bird migration. And again, there's 386 species of birds, neotropical migrants, that overwinter in coffee farms. So it's an extremely valuable potential site for bird conservation. If we wreck all those areas with coffee not planted correctly, we're going to lose a lot of bird species. 54 species of North American warblers. Well, there are 54 species, 42 of them winter in coffee farms. So really valuable potential for conservation. Now there's 2 ways to grow coffee. You can grow shade coffee or sun coffee. This is what shade coffee could look like, where you keep the canopy trees and you plant the coffee underneath. It can be a productive habitat, and a lot of birds clearly do use that. This is what sun coffee looks like. It's habitat for nothing, absolutely nothing. So if you ever have a conservation option where you can discourage the use of sun coffee, please do it. It also uses a lot of fertilizer and a lot of pesticide. So ecologically, sun coffee is a disaster. And only 30% of our coffee is shade coffee. 70 is shade grown. 70% of it is grown in sun coffee now. So when people are drinking coffee all over the world, more and more people are worried, am I hurting the birds when I drink coffee? Well, there are certified coffee brands. So this is the one that the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center, this is their bird-friendly certification. If you see this certification, it means somebody has visited the farm and said, okay, this is actually bird-friendly. I met the guy who was doing this certification, Bob Rice from the Smithsonian, several years ago. And I said, Bob, how do you certify these farms? What makes them bird-friendly? And he said, well, they have to have 12 tree species per hectare. And I said, well, what are the species that what species do they have to have? And he said, oh, it doesn't matter. Well, if you remember the previous talk, it matters very much. which tree species are there, because some tree species are making a lot of insects, and that's what the birds are there for, and some tree species aren't making any insects. So I said, Bob, we need to do research and figure out what the best tree species for shade-grown coffee are in various areas of the tropic. And we're actually engaged in that right now. We're working in Peru, although the virus has stymied us. We haven't been able to get back there since March. But the problem is more and more shade-grown coffee, even shade coffee that's getting certified, is being shaded by eucalyptus or pine, two non-native plants. Eucalyptus is from Australia, of course, and the pine they're using is from northern Mexico. And neither one of them are making any of the insects that the birds need. So what we want to do is change that. We want to give them a ranking of the top trees they should use for shade. It's going to be an uphill battle because they get dual use out of these trees. They use them for lumber as well. And they're coffee growers that said, okay, we'll get rid of the coffee and just grow eucalyptus for lumber. So anyway, that's what we're trying to do at this point. We can grow coffee sustainably, but if you buy shade grown coffee, you are doing the right thing. But just be aware, not all shade grown coffee is grown the way we want it to be in the future.
Well, that's certainly important for all of us coffee drinkers that are, sipping as you discuss things here. And I'm sure it's a vital source of inspiration in the morning for teachers
Right.
as we go through. We are getting some really interesting questions applying to some of the school techniques, and some folks are actually looking to restore their campus a bit with the appropriate native plants, but they also want to kind of extend it beyond that. And so some of the questions from one of our big supporters, Mr. Isaac, who is really involved with gardens, he would like to know if you have tools outside of iNaturalist, because that's something that we definitely push here at the River Authority, to any advice on how they can explore the insects in their school garden and safely, and what kinds of equipment, and it can be very partitioned by age if you need to, but what kinds of equipment should be purchased for their students to explore those insects in their garden.
Well, entomology equipment is still pretty basic. A net and you can get it from BioEquip. You can get a net that is all net-like, or a net that has heavier material that is, it's almost like canvas. And you take these nets and you sweep the vegetation. If any of your vegetation has thorns, get the canvas one, because the net one will rip right away. But you'd be surprised all the insects that end up in your net when you start sweeping vegetation. So that's a wonderful, very, very simple tool. If you really want to look closely at the insects, it probably involves killing them and taking them to a microscope. But we see it in the university all the time now. More and more students are just saying, I'm not going to kill these insects. I'll take pictures of them, but I am not going to kill them. And we're not fighting that. That's okay. The camera is a great way to collect insects without actually killing them these days. But having the kids get out and just sweep vegetation and look what's in there is a wonderful first step. It's always the first step. Almost everybody does that. Don't be afraid if you have a little meadow planting and have paths through it. Don't be afraid to go right up to the flowers that have bees on them and get your face right up there. Those are foraging bees. Even if it's honeybee, they're foraging. They're not defending a colony, and they don't care about you. They will ignore you. I have had schools say, we want to expose our kids to nature, but we don't want any flowering plants because we don't want anybody to get stung. Well, I even had a mayor once said, I want plants in our schoolyard, but none that make pollen because we don't want any allergy issues. Well, all plants make pollen. So, good luck with that. We are worried about things that aren't really problems most of the time.
Okay. And do you have any maybe straightforward tools that would help students identify the insects that they find? Because sometimes it can be overwhelming if it's not kind of a general little fold-out guide.
Yeah. If for caterpillars, there's a book by David L. Wagner, Caterpillars of Eastern North America, and it does include Texas with very nice pictures. It's essentially a picture book that describes what you've just found, but it makes caterpillars accessible to the public. And it's fun. The kids can have a caterpillar, or you can take a picture. It's easy to take pictures of caterpillars and then start thumbing through that book and try to figure out which one it really is. It's a wonderful guide. There's also a guide to the adults, one of the Peterson guides by Seabrook Leckie, and that's moths of the eastern United States. That also includes Texas. It can be a little overwhelming because we've got thousands and thousands of species, and I think there's 4,000 species in that book. But it's there if you want it, or you can take a decent picture of it and put it on what is it, Bug Guide on the web, and it's like iNaturalist done for you. If you post it up there, they will, they say, well, this is this, and they'll send you a little link about it.
That was Bug Guide?
Bug Guide, yeah. It's it's better if the kids work at it themselves. So to have the Wagner book, that's a good resource.
Very good. And I'm going to scroll down through a few more of these. Let's see. Back to can you give us a brand of shade-grown coffee that is sustainable for birds?
What is the one in New England? You know what? I'm having a senior moment. Let me think about it, and I'll get back to you here.
Sure, no problem. Very good. Let's see.
You know what? Put it in. This is where the Google is great. Just say, shade ground coffee, good for birds, and all the brands will pop up. So.
Well, as Janine would say, GTS, Google that stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Very good. From our Rachel Morris, thanks for contributing to a good question here. What are the most compelling strategies you have found for engaging policymakers in prioritization of ecological education initiatives?
I never just barge into a meeting. I have to be invited, but more and more I am being invited to meetings by policymakers. I was invited to talk to, they have a governor's or a mayor's roundup in Illinois, I think it is, where like mayors from 40 different cities got together. I talked to them all at once. What always amazes me is the level of unawareness. I won't call it ignorance, but they don't have a clue about any of this stuff, and that's so scary. So it's good to be able to talk to these people, and they're starting to invite me. That's good. But I always say politicians respond to what their constituents want. If they think it's important to the people that elect them, they will respond to it. It's that simple. So the best tool is to make it known to your mayor, your policymaker, your anybody who's in control of you that this is an important issue. And believe me, they'll start to listen if enough people do that. We're having an election now. There's going to be a top 10 thing voters are worried about, and biodiversity will not be on there. Uh-oh, there you are.
We're okay.
That's our fault. We're not making the things we're concerned about really, really well known. So it's why I work so hard to talk to the public to say these are really important issues. But that's what your politicians are going to respond to. You, in other words.
Very good. Well, everybody, I know you may still have some questions left over, and you feel free to put those in the chat. I will collect them and see if we can facilitate answering them post workshop here. But in the interest of time, I was going to move forward with a couple more slides. Let's see if I can have my own controls. There we are. So I would like to start off by giving some folks some further action from our side too, to kind of facilitate what Dr. Tallamy was talking about. And so I'd like to give Ms. Menopal the floor.
Hi, everybody. So very much in line with what Doug was saying, here is a way for you to work together as a community to actually help maintain native habitats and also increase species biodiversity. Our Mission Reach Ecosystem Restoration Project is an international project that we are maintaining 13 miles of it along the river. So if you join the River Warrior volunteer program, not only do we, have trainings for you to work to learn from the experts that are actually maintaining that completely native habitat, but you could join the volunteer gardener program where you're working along with them and gaining the skills to be able to maintain those native habitats that Doug was talking about. So, so not only do we do exclusive trainings so we have one coming up on 30th of October, which is removing invasive apple snails that are now found in our river. So you're going to learn all these different ways for you to be able to observe and also contribute towards maintaining those areas. So if you would like to be part of that effort, then all you need to do is to go to our website and /volunteer and just enter a name and email, and then you'll actually then get access to these trainings that we do. Join us for these various efforts, which is basically ecosystem restoration plantings, removing invasive species, and the other way that you can actually support is doing BioBlitz. So right now tomorrow is the last day for the Texas Pollinator BioBlitz, and I don't know if you are part of that effort. There's 38,000 observations being made in Texas watching pollinators, and it's amazing. Not only do you learn what is in your backyard and in your schoolyard, you're now part of this community that is helping scientists keep track of native species in our lands. So it's a really neat way for you to become part of that effort as a community and working together with us. So please look into this program. I really would love to have you. And I know when you are with us, then we are opening out the world to also your students. So please, we would love you. You are our leaders there. So teachers, come on, join us, and let's do this together. So any more information, please email me, and we'll do it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, no problem. And those are some of the extra tools, not to forget about iNaturalist, but do keep in touch with some of these other tools for monitoring, include the one that Doug just spoke of today. And I'd also like to give the floor to Ms. Joanne Collins. And Ms. Collins, if you would like to unmute yourself, you're welcome to chime in. Hopefully it works. Let's see. It says you're self-muted. Ms. Collins, we'll come back and see if we can get your clearance here for you. But for right now, we can't hear you. Then, let's see what else we have. Oh, Miss Janine wants to talk about exit tickets. Go
Yes,
ahead.
absolutely. So this is the part of the presentation that I mentioned a little bit earlier. To receive your CPE certificate, I would love it if you could email me, and my contact information's there on the screen, with 1 or 2 sentences that tells us how you might use the information that you learned today with your students. And so I will compile these thoughts. I'll send them out to the group so that we can learn from each other and inspire each other. If you could, it would help me out a lot if you could type exit ticket in the subject line. That just helps me process everything. And I will email you with these instructions for the exit ticket, as well as an evaluation for today's training. So we do hope that we can hear your feedback. There will be a link in that email, and we would love to hear your feedback from today's training.
Thank you, Ms. Janine. And I'm going to go back because Ms. Collins has unmuted. And so, Ms. Collins, you have the floor.
Okay, can you hear me now? this system is different. Everybody Zooms differently. So I finally found where it was. So I'm involved with the Native Prairies Association of Texas, which owns over 5,000 acres of native Texas prairies across the state. We are in the process of getting a full-time position funded in the North Texas area. We have Della Barbado, who is our education coordinator, who is based in the Houston area at Deer Park Prairie. And she does workshops for teachers. And of course, with the COVID thing, she has done a slew of field trips to Deer Park Prairie. So these are available for teachers to use on YouTube. I hope, and all of us will get more involved with the Butterfly Festival as we go forward, because there is a native prairie close to this to San Antonio in Floresville. And if you Google, there's a Facebook group for the San Antonio chapter of the Native Prairies Association. So you can also go there for volunteer work. Spy. Della started the Pocket Prairie Teachers Work Facebook page. So this is there to share ideas. They're sharing seeds. They're sharing lesson plans and all kinds of things. And this is, we're up to 256 members now. So this is shared across Facebook. So if you know anybody anywhere that is interested in having a pocket prairie at their school, please join that Facebook group to share resources and ideas. The particular picture that's on there is a pocket prairie that's on the roof of a Vanguard school in. So those are all available, and our Native Prairies Association of Texas is a great source for education as well as for field trips. We have Facebook posts all the time that have little pictures of things that are appropriate to show to your students. So I hope that you can check those out.
And is this something that folks can promote, or has it already been promoted with like the TAAEE?
Say that again. Can they do what?
Can this be promoted like to like the Texas Association of Environmental Educators?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Yes.
Okay.
We have several former science teachers on our board. And I believe that Della is going to try to infiltrate CAST in some way. So she's a great resource, and these field trips would be a great thing for you to show when you need to breathe. I know our teachers are needing to breathe these days. Bless their hearts.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Collins. It's such good information. I always enjoy hearing from you. And
I do too. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. And any further questions, once again, because of the interest of time, we are going to feel free to email us, and you've got my email. I know you do. And thank you, teachers. We know this has just been such a challenging year. We see that. We're here to help. We hope we keep inspiring everybody through our wonderful guest speakers like Dr. Tallamy. And if you have further ideas and needs that we can support you with, please let us know. And we just want to know how you feel about your insects now. And let's see. I just real quick.
So Carrie, am I still up?
Della
just texted me. Yeah, Della just texted me. There is a field trip to Deer Park Prairie, I believe, that's in CAST. So look forward if you are involved in the CAST virtual this year.
Very good. And it looks like a few folks, I'm going to close that poll, and it looks like a few folks actually grew some in Tenny today. I think that's pretty fun. All right, everybody. And then finally, I want to say, of course, the biggest thank you to Dr. Doug Tallamy. And I feel like not only did we get reminded of things we may have already known, we learned a tremendous amount of the connectedness between all species, including us and our own properties. And you're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat right now, sir. And it's been a great honor to work with you. I am leaving here very inspired. There are creators on that screen that I have never seen, and I want to support those as best I can. And
I appreciate it.
yes, kudos. We need more people like yourself to, and I hope to help the cause certainly. And I know that my team wants to do the same. So we do have a couple of extra questions that we will possibly get to you at the end and in an email. And you have the floor, sir, if you'd like to sign off.
Okay. Just remember that you and your students in particular are, you really are nature's best hope. We're going to turn things around from a grassroots movement. It's not going to come down from the top. So spread the word and get out there.
That's absolutely
Yes.
very good. So once again, everybody, enjoy the day over here in San Antonio. Is a little murky, but we all know that that's going to be very necessary too in our season to come. Thanks again, Dr. Tallamy. Thank you, my crew.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And for Dr. Tallamy, you're free to sign off if you'd like. But for the rest, if you would like for us to unmute you and say hi to us, we're always happy to actually have some voice time with you guys. Okay.
Okay. We got to figure out how to sign off. I guess I'll just click this. Here you go. Leave training. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Good. Oh goodness, it's so nice to see everybody, and I know you've got lots more questions. We are collecting those. I'm going to unmute. Let's see. You are welcome to share a webcam if you so choose, but you don't have to if you would like to say hi to somebody like that. And then I am going to